In the decades after the Second World War, while the city rebuilt and traffic surged through Manhattan's narrow streets, a handful of men quietly turned concrete and asphalt into one of the most profitable rackets nobody ever talked about. They didn't need guns. They didn't need headlines. They just needed a car, a lot, and a handshake with the right people. This is the story of how parking became gold, how one man organized it into an empire, and how it all disappeared when the world stopped needing his kind of order. If you love stories about power, control, corruption, and quiet empires built in plain sight, make sure to follow, because this one ends where nobody expected it to. Manhattan, 1952. The war was over. The factories were running. People had money again, and they were buying cars, not just a few thousands. Every week, new Chevrolets and Buicks rolled off the lots, and every day, those cars needed a place to sit. Manhattan wasn't built for that. The streets were tight. The avenues were packed. Office buildings went up fast, but parking lots didn't come with them. That's where the opening was. At first, it wasn't organized. Empty lots sat between buildings owned by landlords who didn't know what to do with them. Some rented them out to attendants who'd wave cars in, take $1, pocket the cash. No receipts, no system. Just a guy with a cigar box and a folding chair. But the mob saw what the landlords didn't. They saw volume. They saw choke points. They saw a captive customer base that had no choice but to pay. The Genovese family moved first. They had labor. They had muscle. They controlled the longshoremen, the truckers, the union halls. Parking wasn't so different. You needed bodies on the ground. You needed someone to make sure nobody undercut the rate. You needed someone to remind the landlord that protection wasn't optional. By the mid-50s, half the lots below 14th Street were paying tribute, and the ones that weren't got visited. That's when Vincent Napoli stepped in. Vincent wasn't a made man, not yet. But he had something better than a button. He had a head for business. He understood the numbers. He understood the city. He'd worked in his uncle's taxi garage in Little Italy since he was 16, and by the time he was 30. He knew every loading zone, every garage, every crooked traffic cop from Canal Street to the Bowery. He didn't talk loud. He didn't drink heavy. He kept a small notebook in his jacket pocket, and every night he wrote down what mattered. In 1956, Vincent walked into a meeting at a social club on Mulberry Street. The Genovese capo running the parking operation at the time was named Petey Maggs, a man who understood force but not finesse. Petey collected from 26 lots, but half of them were losing money. Attendants were skimming. Landlords were complaining. The cops were starting to ask questions. Vincent sat down across from Petey and laid out a simple pitch. You're collecting nickels when you should be collecting dimes. Petey didn't like being told he was doing it wrong, but Vincent didn't stop. He explained it cleanly. The lots weren't the real money. The garages were. Multi-level garages could hold 200 cars. They ran 24 hours. They served the theater district, the hotels, the business towers. If you controlled the garages, you controlled the flow. And if you controlled the flow, you controlled the rates. Petey listened. A week later, Vincent was made an associate. A month after that, he was running the West Side operation. Vincent started by organizing the attendants. Most of them were neighborhood kids, freelancers, or washed-up drivers who didn't ask questions. Vincent replaced them with people he trusted. Cousins, friends from the old neighborhood. Men who understood that the job wasn't just parking cars. It was keeping order. He introduced uniforms, dark pants, white shirts, small caps. It looked legitimate. It looked clean. Customers liked it. The city liked it. Vincent knew that if you wanted to operate in plain sight, you couldn't look like a racket. You had to look like a service. Next, he standardized the rates. Before Vincent, every lot charged whatever they felt like. $1 here, $2 there, $3 if it was raining. Vincent fixed the pricing. $1 for the first hour, 50 cents for every hour after, $5 for overnight. It wasn't cheaper, but it was predictable. People paid without arguing because they knew what to expect. Then he did something nobody expected. He started paying the landlords more. Most of the landlords were old-timers who'd inherited buildings they couldn't afford to tear down. They rented the empty lots for $200 a month and didn't care what happened after that. Vincent came in and offered them $400, sometimes $5. In exchange, he wanted exclusive rights. Long-term leases, questions. The landlords took it. They didn't know Vincent was pulling 8, 9, sometimes $12,000 a month off a single garage in Midtown. They didn't see the envelopes that went to the union stewards, the building inspectors, the fire marshals. They didn't know that half the cars parked overnight were stolen, repainted, and delivered to chop shops in Brooklyn by morning. By 1960, Vincent controlled 43 locations. Garages in Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, the Garment District. Surface lots near Penn Station, the Port Authority, the old Madison Square Garden. He had 170 men on payroll. Every Friday, cash moved up the line. 10% to the capo, 5% to the underboss, a taste to the Lucchese family for labor peace, another taste to the Colombos for staying out of Brooklyn. Vincent didn't skim. He didn't freelance. He played it straight with the family, and the family respected him for it. They gave him room to operate. They didn't ask too many questions. As long as the money came in clean and quiet, Vincent could run it however he wanted. The peak came in the mid-60s. The city was booming. Corporate offices filled the new towers on 6th Avenue. The World's Fair brought a wave of tourists. Parking rates went up, and nobody complained. Vincent's operation was pulling in close to $2 million a year. Not all of it was clean, but most of it looked that way on paper. Vincent structured it like a corporation. He had shift managers for each location, collectors who picked up the cash every night, a bookkeeper who ran the paperwork through a shell company registered in New Jersey. The company was called Metropolitan Parking Services. It had a phone number. It had an office on 34th Street with a secretary and a water cooler. It looked so legitimate that the city contracted with them for municipal lots near the courthouse. Vincent himself kept a low profile. He didn't live in a mansion. He didn't drive a Cadillac. He lived in a modest apartment on the Upper West Side, ate at the same diner every morning, and attended Mass on Sundays. People in the neighborhood knew him as the guy who ran a parking business. They didn't know he sat in on sit-downs with made men from 4 families. They didn't know he had a suitcase full of cash under his bed and a second set of books in a safe deposit box in Queens. The system ran like a machine. Attendants clocked in. Cars rolled in, money rolled out. Every night, Vincent got a call. The numbers were steady. The cops were quiet. The landlords were happy. The bosses were happy. For a while, it felt like it could run forever. But nothing runs forever. The first crack came from inside. A younger associate named Frankie Delano started talking about raising the rates again. Frankie was ambitious, loud, the kind of guy who wanted to make a name fast. He didn't understand that parking was a volume business. You didn't gouge, you didn't push. Q kept it steady, kept it quiet, and let the money pile up over time. Frankie went to the capo and suggested doubling the overnight rate. The capo liked the sound of it. Vincent pushed back, but he didn't push hard. He knew better than to argue in front of the boss, so the rates went up. And for 6 months, it worked. Revenue climbed. Everyone was happy. Then the complaints started. Hotels began telling guests to park elsewhere. Office buildings negotiated deals with independent garages. The Port Authority opened a new city-run lot with cheaper rates. Customers started shopping around. By the end of the year, Vincent's operation had lost 12% of its volume. The capo blamed Vincent. Vincent blamed Frankie. Frankie got moved to a different crew. The rates came back down, but the damage was done. The second crack came from outside. In 1968, the city passed new zoning laws. Any new building over a certain size had to include parking. Developers started building underground garages into the plans. Suddenly, there were fewer empty lots, fewer gaps in the grid. The real estate boom that had fed Vincent's operation for a decade started to eat it alive. Then the feds moved in. Not on Vincent, not directly, but on the unions, on the construction trades, on the waste haulers, and the trucking companies. The government was building RICO cases, and everyone in the life knew it. People started flipping. Testimonies started leaking. The families got cautious. The flow of money slowed down. Orders came from the top to clean up the operations. Keep everything at arm's length. Cut any business that looked too obvious. Parking looked obvious. By 1972, Vincent was told to step back, not retire, not quit. Just ease off. Let someone else handle the day-to-day. He was 52 years old. He'd built the whole thing. But he understood the rules. You didn't argue. You didn't make noise. You stepped back, and you kept your mouth shut. He handed the operation over to a cousin. The cousin lasted 2 years before getting indicted on extortion charges. The garages got sold off one by one. Some went to legitimate companies. Some went to other families. Most just faded into the background, blending into the city's economy like they'd never been part of anything else. Vincent took a job managing a small garage in Astoria. He clocked in, he clocked out. He didn't talk about the old days. He didn't need to. The people who remembered already knew. By the early 80s, the parking racket wasn't a racket anymore. The city had regulated it, automated it, corporatized it. Meters replaced attendants. Garages installed ticket machines. Rates were posted on signs regulated by the Department of Consumer Affairs. The lots that had once moved millions in cash now moved credit card transactions tracked by computers. The men who'd built it were gone. Some were dead, some were in prison. Some, like Vincent, had just disappeared into quiet lives, living off money that had been cleaned and stashed years before. In the end, the parking lot empire didn't collapse. It didn't explode. It just became part of the city, like everything else the mob had touched. The system they built kept running, but the names on the deeds changed. The money still moved, but it moved differently. Legally, quietly, without the handshakes and the envelopes and the unspoken understandings that had made it all possible. Vincent died in 1994. Heart attack. He was 74. The obituary listed him as a retired parking garage manager. There was no mention of the 43 locations, the $2 million a year, the meetings on Mulberry Street. Just a man who'd worked in the city for most of his life. But the older guys knew. It's the ones who'd worked the lots, who'd watched the money move, who'd seen the system at its peak. They remembered. They remembered when parking wasn't just parking, when a concrete lot in Midtown could pull more money than a legitimate business 10 times its size. When a man with a notebook and a steady hand could build an empire out of empty spaces and moving cars. The city kept the lots. But the men who ran them became ghosts of a world that no longer exists.